everybody, it's Nina. Thanks so much for joining me today for a brand new Studio Monday video. I'm going to be focusing today on how I created this Father's Day card, and I'm going to be showing you how you can use letter dies to create backgrounds for a card. So the background you see here was actually something that I created for a Simon Says Stamp video talking about the Inkylicious ink duster brushes. In that video, I demonstrated how to use the ink duster brushes to create ink blended backgrounds very easily. To create the background, I took some distress inks. This color here is Squeezed Lemonade. And I'm applying the ink down onto the paper in a back and forth motion from side to side on the paper. That allows me to get a nice smooth blend, and I'm creating an ombre of color for this. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be creating a yellow to green to blue color pattern moving up the card panel. Here's a look at that yellow. Next I brought in some of the blue. This is some Mermaid Lagoon, and I'm going to add that along the top. Again, applying this in the same back and forth motion to get that beautiful smooth blend of color. Now for the third color, I'm going to bring in some Twisted Citron and add that one in between the blue and the yellow. And I'm going to transition between the two. And the reason I'm going between the two is to get a nice transition of color. I also added some water splatters with some water that I took from a spray bottle and flicked it on, and then lifted it off with a dry rag. Also, here's a quick look at the ink duster brushes. The ink duster brushes are basically a brush on both ends of this handle, and it's a much smoother application of ink rather than using ink blending tools such as the Tim Holtz blending tool. If you want to see that video, I will have a link to it down in the video description. I'm cutting that panel with the Big Dad dies. These Big Dad dies were from the Mother's Flowers and Father's release that we had a couple months ago. To create the ombre, I need to die cut this background panel 3 times with that dad die. So the darker color, the blue, is going to be on the top, the middle color will be the green, and then the yellow color will be down at the bottom. And I'm cutting out the letters so they'll create that beautiful ombre as you can see here. So I wanted to add some dimension to these letters by taking some clear embossing powder and adding this over top in multiple layers. That will give the letters a dimensional raised finish and also give them a little bit of gloss too. To do this, I'm just taking the Simon Says Stamp clear ink. This is an embossing ink pad. And I'm going to lay the letters on top of this masking tape and apply the ink over top. The reason I applied the letters to the masking tape, it's not only quicker, but it's also easier to hold because I'm not having to hold each individual letter and worry about messing up any of the embossing powder. So by using the tape, that allows me to hold on to the end of the tape and apply the powder right over top very easily. So I'll tap off the excess after I applied some of that clear embossing powder, and then I'll move on to adding the heat. I'm going over top of all of the letters, making sure I get all of the embossing powder melted. After I've heat set them, I can go ahead and work on adding additional layers. Now you could stop with just one, but I wanted to have these letters be more dimensional. So as you can see here, they just have a regular heat embossed coating over top. But if I go back in with that same embossing ink and apply another layer of the ink and the powder, that allows me to get an even more dimensional effect. This embossing powder jar that you see here are Systema in containers. These are actually perfect for food storage, but they also work well for holding embossing powder, and they have lockable lids, so none of the embossing powder is going to end up falling out of the container when you have the lid closed. I really love these containers, and I just actually featured them in one of our top 10 crafty must-have posts. That's over at the blog as well, which I'll have a link to for you to check out. So I'm applying some more heat over top of these letters, and you can see they already have a really cool dimensional effect because of that second layer of embossing powder. I'm going to intensify that even more with a third layer. Now the third layer is totally optional, just like the second one, but I really wanted these letters to have a really cool glazed appearance to them. So by adding all these extra layers of embossing powder, that's giving me that effect. And I'm going to repeat this for all 3 sets of letters. So the yellow ones here I showed in the video, I did the other 2, the green and the blue, off camera. So after I applied all 3 layers of the embossing powder onto these letters, you can see the really cool dimensional effect that we have. I'm going to carefully remove these off of that masking tape. If you find that the letters have a little bit of extra embossing powder hanging off the edges, you can easily remove that. I'll show you how I did that in just a second here. I'm being very careful as I remove the letters just to make sure I don't rip them, but the masking tape is not very tacky, so it's not going to hold the letters onto the tape very hard. Here's where I'm removing some of that extra embossing powder by just taking my fingernail and rubbing along the edges of the letters to get that extra off. Here's a look at all the letters all cut out and ready to go to attach onto my card. Again, like I said, I went ahead and repeated the same process for all the other letters. I'm now taking a piece of teal cardstock here and a Simon Says Stamp wonky stitched rectangle die. I'm going to cut this panel out with that die, and then I will go ahead and put it into my Big Shot machine once again for some additional die cutting. This is where I'm going to add some extra interest to the background. We could totally add these letters onto the background as is, and it would still look cool, but I want this to have some even more cool interest. So I'm bringing that Big Dad letter die in once again, and I'm making sure I can line this up so that the letters are going to fit evenly across this panel in a row of 3. I'm die cutting the top and bottom with that Big Dad die to create a negative into our panel. We're not going to be using these teal die cut letters. We're going to set those aside. We don't need those. Those you can set aside for another project. But these pieces, the negative pieces, are going to work with the panel we just die cut those letters from. Those are going to fill in the inlaid pieces of the letters that we already heat embossed and die cut from our colored panel, and we're going to nest these into this background panel. That'll make more sense as we continue on here. So I'm going to die cut the top also with that Big Dad die, and then I'm going to leave the center of this panel completely free of any die cutting. So after I did the die cutting, I'm moving on to adding some foam tape to the back side of this panel. This is because we want to recess the top and bottom row of letters into this panel, so we need to have some dimension to get that really cool recessed effect. I'm also cutting some thin strips to make sure I can add these in between the letters here. You don't have to do this, but I felt it added a little bit more stability to the panel itself, so I went ahead and added those extra little pieces in between just by cutting the foam tape a little thin. So after I remove the backing of the foam tape, I'm going to attach this down onto my white A2 card base. This card base is from some Nina Solar White cardstock. I'll apply that panel down onto the card base, and then I will move on to adding the letters inside of these negative areas on my panel. I didn't have any liquid glue on hand. My craft space is a little bit messy right now because I'm actually in the middle of getting ready to move. So I don't have things in the places that they normally would be, and I couldn't find the liquid glue, which I ended up finding later, but that wasn't very helpful when I was doing the video. So I just grabbed some double-sided adhesive that I had here that fit behind the letters. This was some 1/4-inch double-sided adhesive. And I'm attaching these letters down in between the negative spaces that are die cut into this panel. I'm also taking those little negative pieces that were left over that fit inside each of the letters, and I'm going to fit those back into place and pop them up with foam tape so that they're at the same level as the teal panel that our letters are nested into. After I attach the letters along the bottom as well, I'm taking some double-sided foam tape, and this time I'm attaching it to the row of letters that's going to go in the middle of the card. This is going to add some extra dimension to the center of the card and just give the background a totally different feel. Now you'll notice I didn't add the letter A to that middle row of letters. That's because I'm going to replace it with the camera icon from the Mom and Dad icon stamp set, which was also from our Mother's Flowers and Father's release. The reason I'm attaching the camera instead of the letter A is because I'm actually giving this card to my dad for Father's Day, and he is an avid photographer. He does a lot of photography involving lighthouses and maritime, nature, and he does a lot of really amazing photography, and I thought that the camera would be a perfect addition to replace that A. It just adds a little bit of extra personalization and interest to the card and makes it look a lot more fun, I think. So I'm taking a sentiment now from that Mom and Dad icon stamp set, and I'm going to heat emboss this onto some black cardstock to create a little sentiment banner underneath of the camera. And then I will apply some white embossing powder over top. I'll heat set that with my embossing tool gun, and then I'll take this into my Tonic mini trimmer to trim this down into a small sentiment strip. This mini trimmer is so handy and was also another product that I included in my crafty must-haves post for Simon Says Stamp. I'm going to trim the ends off of this strip with my Tim Holtz mini snips. These are some of my favorite scissors. I love using the snips and the shears from Tim Holtz. I'm going to attach the sentiment down with some double-sided foam tape, and I actually put 2 layers of foam tape on the back side of this sentiment strip. That's going to give it a little bit of extra relief off of the camera and the word dad in the center there, because both of those are popped up with one layer of foam tape. So the extra layer will just add a little bit more extra dimension and relief off of that panel. So now it's time to finish up the card. I'm embellishing it with a little clear droplet from Pretty Pink Posh. This is one of their large ones, and it fit perfectly over the lens of the camera. So I thought it looked really cool to add that little bit of extra dimension and interest on that camera. And then to give the camera a little bit of extra shine, I'm taking some glossy accents and applying a nice good coating over top of that. And that also intensified the Copic coloring that I did on the camera. I didn't show the Copic coloring in the video simply because I didn't want this video to get too long as it is. And the coloring was so simple because the camera icon is so small. So I do have the colors that I used listed on the Simon Says Stamp blog, so you can go ahead and check that out. I have the link to the blog post in the video description. So I hope this video has given you some inspiration for using letter dies to create really cool backgrounds on your cards that add a lot of really cool interest and also help carry the theme of your card really, really well. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more inspiration. Here are 2 more videos that you might like featuring Simon Says Stamp products. Thanks so much for watching this video. I will see you again very soon and have a great day. Bye!